All right, so as Adam said, I'm lead developer at Find Citizens, and a lot of the reason that I felt the need to speak on this topic is because despite it being like almost the end of 2015, I'm still seeing sites launched. I mean, as early as like today. I just looked at a site today, and that unfortunately we lost on, but like I looked at it because it was a competitor. You always want to know how your competition's doing, especially to the project you lost. But even still, they're pumping out work. There are agencies that are pumping out work that aren't implementing responsive images. And so to understand responsive images, you have to understand a little bit about responsive web design, which I'm hoping everyone in this room does. And I'm hoping everyone in this room is putting it into practice today already. But so to kind of re-go over, and this is going to drive me crazy because there's a mouse right there, responsive web design. When Ethan Marcotti kind of coined it, he really had three kind of high-level things in mind. The first one was sort of a fluid grid system, a system that you could put into place that allowed your content to be treated like water. So that means regardless of what device you're viewing the web page, the content should sort of adapt to fit in that device. That doesn't always work well because sometimes you might have this big font on this desktop site, so you might need to add in some media queries to sort of make some adjustments, maybe lower that font size, raise the contrast, different things. But the other part of that was flexible images. And so at the time, the way you would implement flexible images is that you would take the image that's currently existing on the desktop site and you would just kind of give it a max width of 100%. And that was all fine and good as responsive web was really starting to take off, but it introduced a few problems, especially problems on mobile devices. One of the big problems is that phones, especially a few years ago, and even today in some more rural areas, have terribly slow internet. This 3G device just isn't going to go nearly as fast as it will when it's connected to Wi-Fi or your desktop machine at home. So when you serve up this image that was optimized for this 2560 screen down to this 320 wide device, you're really making it download a lot more information than it needs. Which brings to the second point. Most people run with a data plan. So when you're doing that, not only are you making the website unintentionally slower, you're costing your audience real money. And that's just kind of a dick thing to do. So, and then things get even more murky when Apple starts releasing iPhones and Retina MacBook Pros, because we now have this high pixel density screens that we have to worry about. So, and doubling that 2560 leaves it at 5120, and you really don't want to download that on a 320 wide screen. And then there's also like just a pure artistic fact that it may not always look good. You may have made an art decision to leave a lot of area in that photograph like out of focus to really draw attention to that thing that's being focused on. But as you shrink that down, that focus that you're trying to draw, you just really can't see it anymore. So because of these needs, two competing specs sort of developed. The first one is source set. So the thought process behind source set is that you give all of the control to the browser. You would give the browser a list of image URLs to pull from, and then you would tell it the width, the height, and the pixel density. And then based on that, the browser would make an educated decision on which image wanted to get pulled in. And that was pretty good, but it left out the need for art direction. It didn't allow you to really change out the image to a different crop or zoom, at least not reliably. On the other side, you had picture. Picture was an element originally proposed to act more like the audio or video tag, in that it would have nested source tags that you would use media queries to try to pull the source tag's source attribute and have that display inside of the picture element. And a lot of the reason that this didn't really take off too well was a lot of people, after having implemented audio and video, felt that audio and video were actually a poor design choice for the spec to begin with, and it didn't leave a lot of room for backwards compatibility. So, yeah. Oh, wow, this doesn't show up well on a projection at all. So after years and years of debate, this responsive images community group kind of came together and really started to focus in on the problems that some designers and developers were having with the current landscape of images. And they came up with a few use cases. Yeah, I'm not going to read them all because that's, why bother? Learn more. So based on these use cases, they kind of took the best of both worlds of the source set and the pictures. Originally there was kind of a third offshoot called Source N that didn't last long at all. But I think what the RICG did really well was that they really looked at these two specs and saw that there was a lot of value there, and they just had to be tweaked slightly. And when you tweaked them slightly, powerful things happen. So first, we'll go over sort of the new source set syntax. It still provides you still provide a list of sources, and for the most part, you still give the browsers control over which image is going to be loaded. It has two different syntaxes for using. One is the pixel density descriptor, and with that, as you're listing your sources, you put a descriptor at the end that has number X, and that is to signify I want this loaded on a double pixel density screen, this loaded on a triple pixel density screen. The other descriptor is called the width descriptor. And this syntax is a little bit more verbose, but I feel a lot more powerful. In this scenario, you list out the images, and then you tell the browser how wide those images are. And when you use the width descriptor, you have to use the sizes attribute as well. And with the sizes, you're telling the browser, at these various sizes, I want my image to be basically this size in CSS pixels or other CSS units. So, maybe we stop scaling past 960 pixels, so at 60M, it's always 150 pixels. But sort of that in-between tablet-y place, we want to kind of have it half, but we have like a 20 pixel or a 40 pixel margin, so we give it a 50 VW minus 20 pixels. And it is really cool that calc works in here. Calc is an awesome CSS function, and if you haven't done any research into it, you should. And then finally, if it doesn't match either of these min width statements, we want it to take up the entire width. So the real cool thing about the source set is that it's really kind of trying to bridge that gap and understanding that you know things and the browser knows things. And instead of trying to make it try to understand what the browser knows, accept that you can't, and instead tell the browser what you know. So for example, you know how big the image size should be relative to the viewport. You know the source file's dimensions, but you don't know the screen density. You don't know the viewport dimensions that the user agent's going to load it on. So with sizes and source set, we kind of solve that problem. Picture, rather than being more competitive, picture is really more of an expansion on what source set can do. So with picture, we still have the nested source tags like it originally proposed. But instead of populating the picture element itself, it pulls those sources and loads the image into a nested image element. And the big reason for that was to maintain a sense of backwards compatibility, because you could still default with the image source. So what's really cool is this time around is instead of like being picture versus source set, we actually just threw the source set and sizes into the source elements. And when you're with the source elements, you can declare a medium or a media or a type selector to try to get it to pick that source. So for example, with the media attribute, you would put in a media query, and when that matches true, the image would use that set of source set. The other one is image type, and what this allows you to do is kind of do some built-in feature detection, which is kind of a really cool feature because I feel like this is the first time that we've seen a really good attempt inside of the HTML spec to do feature detection. So like I said, in this example, we're using media. So we check if it's bigger than 60M, and if we do, for this source set, we're using the pixel density descriptor. If it doesn't match that, we try the next source, and this time we show that we're using the width descriptor. And then what's also really cool is if none of the sources match, the image kind of acts as that last final source. So, and the other example with type, we would, in this example, we're trying to load an SVG file, and we're checking to see if we support SVG. And if it does, the SVG will be loaded in, but if not, we're falling back to a ping. So you can't really talk about any new HTML features without really going into and looking at the browser support. And what's cool is SourceSet has pretty good browser support. IE is kind of lacking, but given that they're starting to implement it in Edge, and despite what Microsoft's kind of spinning it at, like Edge pretty much is IE. Oh, it's a rewrite, but it's like, yeah. So I feel SourceSet is got pretty good and growing support. Oh. Picture, on the other hand, its support is very lacking. Really, it's Chrome, Firefox, and Opera that have fully implemented support. Looks like IE is actually planning on, or sorry, Edge is planning on implementing support with its next round. What's interesting is that Safari, nor iOS Safari, is implementing Picture, and I kind of feel like this is, personally, I feel like it's just kind of petty differences because they were, like, Apple was pushing hard for SourceSet. But that's neither here nor there. So today, you have to rely on a polyfill to really start using it. But thankfully, there's been a polyfill that's been around since before the picture spec was even really finalized. And I think all credit has to go to Scott Gell. Well, I mean, there are other people that worked on it, but like, I know that his library of picture fill has saved me a ton of time and allowed me to put out sites that save my users a whole bunch of page weight. So the downfall, the things to keep in mind when you're implementing picture fill is that there are some scenarios where you could run into a possible double download, and these scenarios are one, if you're using any sort of source set when the browser doesn't yet support source set, but you declare a source, it will load the source, and then the JavaScript polyfill will then make it load whichever source set is declared. On the converse, if you don't declare the source and JavaScript fails, you see the alt text. So that's kind of a decision that you guys have to make on your own. What do you find important in that scenario? Thankfully, since I'm mostly concerned with like mobile browsers when I'm talking about data plans, page weight. With Apple and Android implementing source set, it's not as big of a deal to where I don't think the double downloading for that scenario is as much of a risk. However, there's another one. If you use the picture spec with the sources and the browser supports source set but not picture, such as iOS, it will load the image's source set or source, and then it will load the one from the source tags. So things that you have to keep in mind when you're trying to implement a solution like this. So here are some strategies that I use. So for one, I almost always use the width descriptor. The pixel density descriptors are right, but it's very rare that I have an image that is always the exact same size through all through all through the whole flexible web experience. So since by giving when I give the browser that those lists of widths, and I declare the sizes, the browser's smart enough to know that if I'm on a 430 screen, but I'm also on a Retina screen, it's going to give me the 860 image. It's smart enough to know that. It's also important to know that you should really reserve use of the picture element and the source tags to scenarios where it really is only meant for art direction. So if you need to recrop, if you need to zoom in, those are good times to use it. But I say this because you'll run into odd bugs if you start putting different aspect ratio images inside of the same source set list. I know this from experience. The other thing is, don't go too overboard with the source set lists. It's very tempting to want to optimize to every last degree you can. I mean, at one point, for I think my second project working on this, I was trying to optimize at like every 160 pixels, and that was just insanity. So really take a look at like how much you're saving with each image size, and then kind of go from there and make sure that the savings is worth it. You don't want to you don't need to add a new source for like saving 10 kilobytes. Another thing I highly recommend for sanity is to rely on some sort of server-side image manipulation for creating the images at the different sizes. So I don't think too many of you would probably be working in a situation where you're not tying your front-end code into a CMS, unless you're dealing with like email, in which case you can ignore this whole presentation. So what I like to do is just set my different crops in the CMS, and then just upload the highest image I need and let the CMS do the bulk of the work for me. And then I also recommend going sort of a reverse of how I normally advocate for things. I'm very mobile first in most things that I do. In this, I list my higher res sources first. And the reason is, as it discounts this at, no, it's not high enough, no, it's not high enough, and this is my fallback. If I'm looking at that iOS device that doesn't support picture, but does support source set, I've basically eliminated it from ever needing to read that source, so I get around that double download problem. So here's some more resources that I recommend that you look at to get a better understanding of source set and images. And now I will open it up for QA. Yeah. Yeah, that's just HTML code. Yeah. Oh, sorry. So the question was, how is that implemented? Is it just HTML code? Right, and so that is just new HTML code. Yeah.
Ensuring that you're not doing the double download, verifying after the so testing and making sure. There's two things. Applying it and testing.
Manually mostly, and also kind of understanding. If you can kind of get a better understanding of like what browsers support and how the polyfill works, you can sort of cheat the system. And like I said, that's kind of the way that's kind of the reason that I kind of declare my desktop styles up here and use min widths down, is to kind of help get around that. But you do need to verify, and with like your iPhone device, you can plug it into your computer and then you open up the Safari inspector and kind of do everything that you can do in the Chrome inspector tools.
I've heard that there's tricks of nesting it within specific, like a div within a div, and make sure that it's nested in a specific way and that assures that it's not downloaded and not needed.
That sounds like I've never heard that. The only thing that I could think of that may be going down that path is if you're using divs and trying to save that, like I've seen one approach prior to responsive images coming out where people would use divs and then load background images inside the div and then and then kind of use it as a pseudo image. but I'm not familiar with the loading it like a certain level nested of divs to kind of prevent the double download.
I don't know if you heard that.
Yeah.
So you very clear that the source set, you give the sizes of the image relative to the viewport.
Yeah.
And then you give the different image sizes.
Yeah.
And then the browser does the job.
Right.
But what is the advantage of using the picture part?
So that is mostly for if you need to switch aspect ratio or an art. It's more of an art direction use case. So sometimes you want to have a different crop. In fact, almost always my designers want to give me a different image crop for mobile devices versus full-on desktop devices. So if I need to crop it differently, what I need to tell the browser is that okay, for this media query, use this set of images, because the source set, the real power comes with it when you use that source set within the picture element and in those source tags, because at that point you're just telling the browser at different points which list you want it to look at. Yeah, you're giving it a little more guidance. Like instead of giving it a big long list of every possible image you want it to load, no, at this point look at these ones. Look at these ones over here now. One more? Yeah.
I apologize if you're a question because I'm not a developer.
Okay.
Okay, so if you're serving up this image based on viewport, say you're on a large monitor and you're in a browser and you see this image, you're like, oh, I want to see this image larger, stretch your browser to get a lot bigger. Can your page refresh to larger size browser?
So the answer to that is it depends. And the reason, okay, so I guess I should repeat the question. The question is, if you want to see an image larger, can you expand your browser to view the larger version of that image? In Chrome, that definitely used to be the case. If you loaded, the way Chrome implemented picture at first, and I think it may have changed, is it would load whichever image it felt was appropriate for the screen size. Then if you expanded, it would load the new image. If you shrank, well, you've already got a higher image, so it's no point in loading a new one. But Firefox, on the other hand, the way it's set up, whatever image is loaded when the page loads, that's the image that you get until you do another hard refresh. And that's one of the things that the spec intentionally left those decisions up to the browser on how best they wanted to implement it. I'm not entirely sure that it still does that. I would have to double back. All right. Thanks.